Okay, I would like to welcome you once again to the lecture series, The Critical Gaze, Reflections on Global Crises in Portuguese Language Comics at the University of Cologne. My name is Yannick Scholz. I'm a research assistant at the Portuguese-Brazilian Institute of the University of Cologne, and I'm pleased to introduce today's guest, Júlia Garraio. Júlia Garraio is a researcher at the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. She obtained a bachelor's degree in languages and literatures and a master's degree in comparative literature, both at the University of Coimbra. In 2003, she finished her PhD research project about the construction of the image of the poet in works of Günther Eich. Since then, she has been working a lot on memory studies and sexual violence. Her current research interests include sexual violence, masculinities, feminisms, nationalism, comparative literature, and media. Oops, just a second. I want to mention some of the projects in which Júlia Garraio participated to give you an understanding of her approach and her work. In 2007, she worked in a project entitled The Memory of Suffering, Depictions of Violence in Contemporary German Literature on World War II. In 2014, she joined a research group about Portuguese women and the liberation movements in Africa. From 2015 to 2019, she worked as a postdoc researcher in the project Memoir, Children of Empires and European Post-Memories, funded by the European Research Council. And since last year, she is part of a research project entitled Decode Masculinities for a better understanding of the role of the media in building perceptions of masculinities in Portugal. This is by far not everything. Her recent work examines how women's experiences in wartime are appropriated and transformed by gendered national scripts. She's co-founder of the international research group SWAC, Sexual Violence in Armed Conflict. She integrates the international editorial board of the European Journal of Women's Studies, and she is co-coordinating the project Policredus, an observatory on religion in public space. She published numerous articles and book chapters in German, English, and Portuguese. Since we are at the University of Cologne, I would like to draw your attention to one particular text about the sexual assault on New Year's Eve 2015 in Cologne, which was published recently. If you would like to read about Portuguese colonialism, I can recommend two texts. The first one is from 2016 and has the title A Body to Make Luanda, the Black Woman from the Countryside in Angolan Literature. The second one is from 2019 and is entitled Framing Sexual Violence in Portuguese Colonialism, on some practices of contemporary cultural representation and remembrance. Today, Júlia Garraio will present some observations on modern Portuguese comic books regarding the way those books picture the colonial war in Africa. Júlia, we are very grateful to have you and are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here, and I would like to thank Beatriz as well for suggesting my name. So I would like to start by sharing my PowerPoint. So please let me know if it is working. Yes, it is working, right? I'm okay. Okay, so I'm trying to have some light here more. Okay, so when you follow the media as well as private debates about Portuguese cultural productions that deal with colonialism and its legacies, you often come upon claims that the subject has been avoided, is unknown, and sometimes the word taboo even pops in. However, if you consider the presence of colonialism in Portuguese public spaces, just think about Lisbon and monuments like Mosteiro do Jerónimo, Torre de Belém, the street names, and the so many monuments are honoring the veterans of the colonial war. If you think about school curricula and the presence, the huge presence of the so-called discoveries and the loss of Brazil, for example, in school curricula, as well as if you think about cultural productions such as literature, we realized that there was never a taboo, actually. However, the sense of newness that marks some debates on colonialism is certainly not wrong. Because when we map the cultural memories of the past, we can easily identify how new perspectives have been continuously added, how the focus of attention has been shifted, and how the memorialization of the past has been marked by tensions and contests of memory. Let's just have a very brief look at literature. I gathered here some titles. Most of them had a significant public and commercial impact. So, as you know, the colonial war ended in 74 with the revolution. Just look at the publication date of some of the most emblematic war novels by Lobo Antunes, Cruz de Judas and Fado Alexandrino. While in Lobo Antunes, we have the perspective of war veterans, so as victims of Portuguese politics and as perpetrators of war crimes. With authors such as Lídia Jorges, the perspective shifts to women, and I mean, here she deals mostly about women who went with their husbands who were in the military. But her book, and there are many others, the fact that you have a focus on the women of the military also gives you a hint at the civil society in the Portuguese civil society in the colonies. And more recently, with authors such as Paulo Faria, you have a new perspective, so the perspective of the children of the war veterans. Now, consider the return. So, and when I'm talking about the return, I'm referring to the process that refers to the arrival of over 500,000 people with Portuguese citizenship in the context of independence, and most coming from Angola and Mozambique. So there are often claims that the subject was for a long time a taboo. It was definitely an uncomfortable subject, that is for sure, but hardly a taboo. Cardoso Pires' short story dates from 75, and the last 2 decades witnessed a boom of cultural production about the return, marked once again by the broadening of perspectives. And now what we have more recently are, in the last decade, last 20 years, are books or cultural productions by children of the return, so those who were very young when the process took place. And with that, new perspectives. So you have, once again, the introduction or the adding or a focus on women's perspectives. I would like to refer as well to a book who had not such a public presence. It was not so much discussed as Caderno de Memórias Coloniais or O Retorno. That is Os Pretos de Pousa Flores, which is also a novel about the return, but with a very, very different perspective. So here we have the perspective of Blacks or racialized people who had white fathers and who came with them to Portugal. So you have a new perspective. And also Ida Gomes' novel is also interesting because it can already be seen as part of a literature, a more recent literature by Black Portuguese authors who address the experience of racism in contemporary Portugal, like the famous Escabelo. So the last decades have witnessed as well several controversies regarding the colonial past and the memorialization of the colonial past, among which stands out the fierce debates about the plans for the construction of a museum for the discoveries in Lisbon. But let me just call your attention to a more recent or equally quite recent controversy, namely the one regarding the statue of the Padre Antonio Vieira. So the statue actually is very interesting because this is part of this transnational movement aiming the removal of symbols of the colonial past. But there is a particularity with Portugal is that the statue that has been the target of criticism is not an old statue or a dictatorship statue or something like that. So this is a very recent statue. It is from 2017. So it is 3 years old. So the statue that is being, I mean, yes, the critics are asking for its removal. So what is very strange, I mean, not very strange, but what peculiar with Portugal is that this particular statue that you can easily see how it reinforces and reproduces colonial topoi. So it was inspired by 18th century engraving. So this statue is from 2017 when precisely when anti-racism was becoming very visible in Portuguese political debates. And so the statue, as you can see, which reproduces all this colonial topoi, was splattered with red spots and inscriptions decolonized just 4 days after the anti-racism demonstrations that took place in several Portuguese cities following the killing of George Floyd. So now, what about comics? Have Portuguese comics been part of these contests of memory? How have they been contributing to this debate? In order to try to answer these questions, I will present a brief overview of the connections between colonialism and comics in the Portuguese context. So, comics, usually understood as cultural productions for broader audiences, are often perceived as being very useful sources to examine social imaginaries. They may echo the values and agendas of certain sectors and political actors, and they can be seen as a powerful tool to influence societies, namely through children or through childhood experiences. So, since important centers of comics productions like France and Belgium were also colonial powers, a wide range of research has been examining comics as part of the colonial archive. Since the political perceptions of colonialism have experienced deep changes at least in the Western countries in the last 100 years, comics have been at the center of several controversies about how to deal with the legacies of colonialism. So Tintin au Congo is a widely known example. What was normalized for decades as successful literature for children was denounced later as indoctrination in racism and colonial propaganda. So it's widely known aesthetics were used, therefore, by anti-colonial authors to produce counter-narratives aimed at exposing the violence and racism of the colonial project. And once again, a very famous example, Papa in Africa. So the presence of comics in Portugal is much smaller than in France and Belgium. Nonetheless, Portuguese comics also contributed to the legitimization of the colonial project in the 20th century. Luís Cunha and Rosa Cabecinhas, they argue, and they have these several texts, I'm quoting, I'm referring to one of their works. They argue that comics depictions of blacks, Portuguese comics depictions of blacks, contributed to legitimize colonialism and the colonial war during Estado Novo, the dictatorship. So blacks were represented as savages or as children who had to be civilized, educated, and who should, through education, so Portuguese education and civilization, so to say, they should become good Portuguese citizens. The authors also point at the persistence of these imaginaries from the colonial archive in post-dictatorship comics. I copied here 2 examples of their study. So the history of Portugal, which perpetuates the understanding of colonialism as a civilizing mission. So the idea, they were there to Christianize the savages. And then another example from Jim Delmonico is a series, so a kind of parody of Tarzan with a register of comedy, with abundant many jokes about sex, with some And these comics, Jim Delmonico, they reproduce emblematically all the tropes of savagery, cannibalism, and excessive sexuality attributed to the blacks. So now let's focus on the colonial war, which has such a strong presence in Portuguese urban space, but also in cultural production, so literature, cinema. The Portuguese colonial war, which was called Overseas War, so Guerra do Ultramar at the time, took place in Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, where it is remembered as the War of Liberation. It officially started with the massacres of white settlers and their employees in northern Angola in 1961 and ended in 1974 when the Carnation Revolution paved the way for the negotiations with the liberations movements leading to the independences. So only in Guinea-Bissau, and this is quite important to understand for our reading of Vampiros, which brings us to Guinea-Bissau precisely. So only in Guinea-Bissau there was a unilateral independence in 1973, so before the revolution. And when the revolution took place, the Portuguese army could hardly control half of the territory. So we can identify three main traditions in the representation of the colonial war in Portuguese comics, which sometimes overlap. So this is not separate traditions, sometimes they overlap. So the first one is the glorification of the brave Portuguese colonial soldier. The second one, the understanding of the war as one of the many evil consequences of the dictatorship. And the third one, the colonial soldier as a victim of the war and a victim of the dictatorship. So let's go to the first tradition. So the first tendency dates actually from the time of the war. There are many examples in publications connected to the military war effort. And this tradition portrays the colonial soldier as an heir of the brave man that made Portugal great at the time of the Reconquista, so the conquest of territories from the Muslim kingdoms in Iberia, and of the brave man of the discoveries, so to say. After the revolution, this tradition continues, actually, so it's not a break with the revolution and with the end of the colonial war. And it continues with, especially with this author, Vassal Miranda, who was a former commando in Guinea-Bissau, and he published several comics books about his missions and the missions of his comrades and superiors' deeds during the colonial war, celebrating Portuguese professionalism and courage in the war. Politically, these books can be described as very, very reactionary. Independent movements are depicted as thugs and terrorists, so actually the words that were used during the dictatorship to refer to the independent movements. Or in the more recent one, so there is a shift, I mean, he changes with the years, so the last one, so there is a change in the way the Africans are portrayed, the African liberation movements are portrayed. In the last ones as forces which are morally and intellectually inferior to the Portuguese. Portuguese left-wing politicians who negotiated the independences are referred always as traitors who gave to communists what was ours. So Portuguese presence in Africa is always depicted as a civilizing mission. Now let's move to the second tendency or the tradition. After the revolution, many comics depicting the dictatorship, especially by left-wing authors, have brief references to the colonial war, which is referred as one of the many evils of the right-wing regime, such as poverty. It stands there as poverty, alongside poverty, child labor, censorship, political persecutions, tortures, and so on. So, and I'll give you here probably the most emblematic example is the acclaimed biography of the dictator Salazar, which has one page about the colonial war. So let's move then to the third tradition, the colonial soldier as a victim of the dictatorship. This tradition, just like the second one, interprets the colonial war as a product of the dictatorship, but it uses it as its main subject and not as an example of the evils of the regime. Some comics published immediately after the revolution in the newly founded magazine Visão, para uma nova banda desenhada portuguesa, are probably the most paradigmatic examples. Visão is usually praised for its aesthetic innovations and efforts to politicize Portuguese comics. The unfinished Mateio e 24 is about a war veteran who suffers from panic attacks, so post-traumatic stress, related to the killing of a black rebel in the war. Angola, 1951, was inspired by events in the war in Angola, a soldier who mistakenly killed a black woman and a child. The magazine published as well the translation of a biography of Amílcar Cabral, the famous intellectual and independence leader from Guinea-Bissau, and comics against the war in Vietnam. So this signals the political position of the magazine, left-wing, anti-colonial, and anti-imperial, aiming to give access to the political perspective of those who, until very recently, had been fighting against the Portuguese soldiers. And simultaneously, it depicts these same Portuguese soldiers as victims of the war. Both comics depict war crimes committed by the Portuguese, killing of wounded rebel and unarmed civil women and children, but they contextualize these acts, these crimes, in the political system that framed their actions and limited their agency. These comics participate in a narrative that is very pervasive in Portuguese remembrance of the colonial war and in Portuguese cinema. And I think about Adeus Português, Inferno, or Monsanto, or the documentary A Guerra, Joaquim Furtado's A Guerra. It represents war veterans as a victim and a perpetrator, as a kind of a masculinity that has been torn and damaged by the violence that he suffered and he practiced, as traumatized man suffering from post-traumatic stress, unable to reintegrate into civil society, and whose repressed fears and sense of guilt erupt violently in their daily lives. We can easily identify echoes from discourses and aesthetics from American cultural memories of the Vietnam War. Actually, in these movies, in these cultural productions, the Portuguese soldier, the Portuguese colonial war is represented as a national trauma, as a kind of the Portuguese Vietnam. Now, let's move to young authors. So the most recent comics about the colonial war are by authors who were born after the colonial war. So I'm referring to Cinzas da Revolta and to Vampiros. And let me just call your attention to the fact, I mean, they are by two authors. So Cinzas da Memória, Cinzas da Revolta, I'm sorry. The script is by Miguel Pérez, who was born in 1987. And the drawings are by João Amaral, who was almost 10, was 8 when the revolution took place. And Os Vampiros, the script is by Filipe Melo, who was born in 1977, and the drawings are by his partner who works, Juan Cavia, who is from Argentina. Okay, so Vampiros was a huge success in Portugal. It has been discussed, advertised, read, and praised outside the circles of comics. And this is very important because sometimes, I mean, you will have the lectures and the discussions with the authors from Portugal, and they will certainly tell you more about this. There are the circles of the people who are involved in comics, and sometimes it's a circle, it's people it's smaller circles. And what is surprising with Vampiros, it was, sorry, is that it was a success outside these circles, and it was discussed outside the circles, the traditional or the usual circles of the comics in Portugal. And and I'm sorry, I have to drink. I'm sorry. I hope that I'm not losing my voice. So, what is also interesting with Vampiros is that it is one of the few comics that integrates now the Plano Nacional de Leitura. So Plano Nacional de Leitura is this list of books that is made every year by the Ministry of Education, and is containing books that are advised for schools. And so, and Vampiros is for the 10th until the 12th grade, so teenagers between 15 and 18. And it is one of the few comics that is in that plan. I mean, they usually were very conservative, but now it's less conservative. So now they already have a few comics, so to say. I would like to propose here an examination of these comics inspired by the concept of post-memory, as it was coined and understood by Marianne Hirsch. In spite of the huge differences regarding the process of memory transmission and the lack of trauma in connection to the war among these two authors, and I'm referring to Pérez and Filipe Melo, so none of them comes from veteran families or have to do anything with the return. Hirsch's concept can be very useful to tackle the relationship that these authors who were born after established with the colonial war and the process of creation. I'm referring to issues that were developed by Hirsch, such as the representation of the past being mediated not by recall, but, and I'm quoting Hirsch, mediated not by recall, but by imaginative investment, projection, and creation. The idea that the effects of events in the past continue into the present, this leading those who were born after to try to create, to imagine a narrative for something that they know only as fragments. And this idea of fragments of the past is central in the author's projects of creating a representation of the past through fiction that would contribute to the transmission of memory to the younger generations. So in their many interviews to the press when they published their books, both of them, they say that they did not know much about the war, and they said their generation, I mean their friends, colleagues and so on, either. So it was somehow a subject that was unknown to them. And I mean, it's important to say that they don't come from war veterans. For example, for something like me, it would be very difficult because my father is a war veteran. But they said that in their case, that was not the experience. So, so the decision for them, the decision to write a script inspired by the war implied a decision to research, first of all, about the war, to know something about, to know about something they did not know until then. Filipe Melo, he talked a lot about about this process to the press in his interviews, and he said he interviewed war veterans, he read testimonies, he read memories of war veterans. And it's also interesting, I mean, he stressed that in several interviews, that he asked the daughter of Amilcar Cabral to read and to correct his book. So he wanted to have it read by her before being published. So in a certain way, he said, well, it is a fiction, but he wanted that fiction to remain faithful to the experiences of those who lived through the war in Guinea. So their comics resulted certainly from a process of imagination framed by research undertaken by the authors in their adulthood, with the aim of making younger generations aware of events that, so they argued, were almost unknown to them. One can easily recognize in their books tropes from the post-74 left-wing comics that pervade Portuguese cinema as well, about the colonial war. So war as a brutalizing experience, the representation of Portuguese war crimes, the colonial soldier as a victim of the dictatorship according to pacifist anti-imperial stance. However, these left-wing tropes are reproduced, or rather formulated, in contemporary pop cultural aesthetics and submitted to diverse processes of quotation. So I'm moving to Cinzas da Revolta. So the narrator in Cinzas da Revolta is a soldier who is among the first troops deployed to Angola to crush the rebellion after the '61 massacre of white soldiers. He is part of a group with a secret mission of rescuing a white girl belonging to Salazar's, so the dictator, family, who had been kidnapped by the rebels. So while the plot echoes narrative devices from American popular culture, namely this romanticizing this, I mean, there are so many movies in American movies romanticizing the syndrome of Stockholm, and you can see that here. It's also a kind of romanticizing this Stockholm syndrome. The drawings hint at contemporary video games, heroines, so sometimes you can have a hint of Lara Croft, but also once again, American cinema. So, for example, I reproduced you the final panel. It refers directly to the famous movie, The Apocalypse Now. So, reinforcing this pervasive Portuguese public narrative about the colonial war as our Vietnam, so to say. So, while Cinzas da Revolta fictionalizes the first years of the colonial war in Angola, Vampiros takes us to 72 in Guinea-Bissau. So to say, I mean, this is very important because 72 in Guinea-Bissau is probably the most difficult war scenario that the Portuguese armed forces faced. So the last years of the war in Guinea-Bissau, when Portugal had lost control of a big part of the territory, and the rebel movement already had anti-aircraft material furnished by the Soviet Union, which changed completely the situation in the ground for the Portuguese. So Vampiros' plot is about a secret mission inside Senegal to destroy a rebel military base. It is basically a very common structure in horror movies. So when you read it, you recognize immediately that basic structure from the horror movie. So the soldiers disappear one by one, or they are brutally killed one by one, and you don't know what is killing or who is killing them. So you suspect that there is something supernatural in that dense forest. So this is also very important. I don't know if you are familiar with the name of Filipe Melo. So he's actually quite well known in Portugal, not only or not, well, now perhaps the situation has changed, but when he published Vampiros, he was known foremost as a musician, as a very accomplished musician, jazz musician. But he had already published a very successful trilogy. And so already with Juan Cavia, with this Argentinian artist. So, and they had produced this series, The Adventures of Dog Mendonça and Pizza Boy. So in Portugal with the publisher Tinta da China, and in the US with the publisher Dark Horse Comics, which is something, I mean, that is not very common to have Portuguese comics author publishing with Dark Horse Comics, so to say. So, and this trilogy granted them commercial success. I mean, it was being sold in English as well, and that makes all the difference, as you can imagine. So, and recognition as comic authors. So, those of you who have read the trilogy will surely remember how these books quote and play constantly with the codes of the cinema. So you have reference to thrillers, Matrix, I mean, to apocalypse movies, to catastrophe movies, to war movies. So it is a process of intense quotation, so quotes all the time. So and parody as well, quote and parody. So furthermore, it's also important to refer, in 2003, Melo directed the first Portuguese zombie movie, I'll See You in My Dreams. So I'll See You in My Dreams is basically a love story between a zombie hunter, also, I mean, always this kind of jungling with comedy as well. It's also sometimes a tragedy, comedy, and so on, and in this horror setting of the zombie movie. So in Portugal, it's a zombie movie that takes place in Portugal, just like the trilogy with all these catastrophes happening is also in Portugal. So it's very interesting because you see Portuguese urban space as you have never seen it in other cultural production, Portuguese cultural production. So of this apocalypse and the catastrophe and the zombie apocalypse and so on. So in this movie, this short, how do you say, short film, this short film is a love story between a zombie hunter and his wife, who is already a zombie. She was turned into a zombie. So, and it is very, very interesting the way this movie is very interesting for the analysis of vampiros. Because you already have this confrontation between two worlds which actually mirror each other, and the use of the frame of the forest and the hut in the deep forest as a place of mystery, of horrors, of danger. And so you have here, and in the trilogy, also you have already, I mean, if you read carefully the trilogy and Vampiros, you discover several motifs, aesthetics, this use of quotes, continuous quoting, American cinema, the structure of the thriller that actually characterizes Vampiros. So somehow the aesthetics are already there. But what distinguishes Vampiros from this previous work is the strong political subtext of Vampiros, so to say. That is what differs is from the previous work. So let's move to Vampiros. So Vampiros script skillfully connects and plays with three dimensions. So first, there is the song by the engaged revolutionary singer and songwriter Zeca Afonso, Os Vampiros, which is quoted at the beginning of the book. I don't know if you are familiar with this famous song. It's a very famous song in Portugal, and it uses the vampire as a symbol of social exploitation. And the song was extremely popular and is associated with the revolution, actually, to denounce the widespread poverty and exploitation of rural workers, especially in the south of Portugal during the dictatorship. Second, the plot relies on an historical fact. There was actually a unit of Portuguese commandos in Guinea-Bissau that was named Vampiros. And then finally, the third dimension, the plot plays with the codes of the horror movie. A voyage into an hostile environment where nature and later a hut in the jungle function as a weak law, and the characters disappear or are killed one by one until the last survivor, the protagonist, becomes face to face with the thing. So the structure has been used again and again in popular cinema, and perhaps the most important reference, or not the most important, but the reference that comes to mind immediately is Predator, because I mean it is one of a famous example, a popular American movie that uses, that plays with the codes of the war film, the metaphor, the colonial metaphor of the jungle, and the symbology of the monster as well. So let me show you perhaps some unfinished pages of the books. I mean, I added here the pages that before the speech bubbles were added, so they were the ones that were available, and I did not want to copy the book, so I took them. So perhaps we can here have, so that you have an idea of the drawing. So this follows, I mean, this is the beginning, and this is the beginning of the mission. So when they get into Senegal, into the jungle, and yes, when they start being attacked, and here, okay. So the jungle is a well-known, and the forest is a well-known pervasive colonial trope associated with danger, savagery, human sacrifice. And there is a title that immediately comes to mind of colonial literature, that is The Heart of Darkness by Conrad. And the presence of this trope, of this symbol of the jungle in Western imaginaries, as we know, has been continuously reinforced by American war cinema. So once again, Apocalypse Now, the adaptation of Conrad, but also by horror cinema, and just think about Blair Witch Project. So Mel is here playing with cultural, with the assumption that his readers, young readers, they have all watched Blair Witch Project. They all know Apocalypse Now. They are Predator, and so on. So Mel skillfully works with these three dimensions in a script that never fully clarifies the central motive of the vampire. And we never know. Is that forest haunted by monsters that hunt both rebels and commandos, and Portuguese commandos, and turn them into flying animals? Or it's all about hallucinations from men who have been for too long in war, who have committed atrocities and are being haunted by their own phobias, dreams, and phantoms, and sense of guilt, which make them perceive combat events as a work of the supernatural. So just let's have a look at some pages. So here, the second pages, I mean, you have these images suggesting the eruption of the protagonist's dreams and nightmares. So perhaps memories, and this idea, this is also, even the colors then change. I mean, when you have his inner world, the colors change. So here, and this image here is very important. The first one is very important. So this suggestion that that his identity is dissoluting, and his mental sanity is also dissoluting. So throughout in the jungle, so as he gets deeper and deeper into the jungle, that he's losing his sense of himself. Then we have also, it's also very important, this image, some of the drawings suggest you see these monsters or the white child. So there are things that are being depicted there, and you don't know exactly what it is. So this is how the protagonist sees his comrades. So he awakes, and when he sees them, he sees monsters, and then he realizes that it's the other soldiers. Or he sees in the middle of the jungle, he sees this white child, and then he says, "Look at that child," and the other says, "But there is no child there." And he looks again, and there is actually no child there. Or also very important is with the diseases. So as they get deeper and deeper into Senegal, into the jungle, so some of the soldiers are affected by diseases, by fever, by dehydration, and the way it is all depicted. So you can easily see. So it is as if they are becoming zombies or werewolves or vampires. So I mean, not necessarily a younger audience will recognize this. Okay, this is the moment someone is turned to a zombie or something like that. And here as well, almost by the end. So when the base is attacked, you see all this. There was no one in the hut, and he sees all these people, all these monsters coming out of the hut. And at the end, he's taken by the child as well. So this is all things that that happen, and which actually allow two interpretations. So you can see them as real, yes, they were there, or you can interpret and say, no, this only exists in his mind, so to say, and they express actually his mental instability and the dissolution and his death, so to say. Nonetheless, what is interesting is whether you take one interpretation or the other interpretation. So they converge, both of them, in a metaphorical reading of these men, so commandos, Portuguese commandos and rebels, as puppets in the hands of a villain that is not there, someone who is never visible in the book, and who is responsible for the men, both rebels and the Portuguese commandos, being in that situation and being transformed by the war into monsters. So Mel actually does not want to make moral judgments on the soldiers, but somehow his book invites the reader to reflect on what transformed these men, how they became war criminals, and therefore the book compels the reader to think about how would the life of these men had been had they stayed in their villages in Portugal. And this is very important because, I mean, all these men, they are, they come from their villages, they come from poor families. You don't have here the upper class, which is also something very, very common in the colonial war, is the ones who were sent to yes, the cannon food, although perhaps not proper word, but the difficult missions. So they were for the underclass, so the lower classes, so to say. The upper class would have a way of avoiding the war, going abroad to study abroad, having some doctors say they were unfit to go to war. So the class issue is very important when you address the war, and Vampiros suggests this by saying, well, by telling a little bit about where they come from. And you see all of them, they come from rural areas and poor families. So the codes of popular culture, so familiar to younger generations, aim therefore a political discussion about the colonial war. So why were the Portuguese in Guinea? The question then shifts the focus of the discussion from the deeds and the actions of these men, so war crimes, to the decision makers who were not in Guinea nor in the villages of these Portuguese men, but in Lisbon, so the Portuguese government. By fictionalizing iconic moments of the war, Cinzas da Revolta and Vampiros aim to contribute to a political responsible collective memory. They make younger generations acquainted or familiar with past events that are not familiar to them in a language or in aesthetics that are attractive to them and that they understand. So considering Vampiros' success, we can suspect that their readers may be encouraged to question the history of their families and to reflect on the presence of African cultures and African populations or with origins in Africa in Portugal. One might expect as well that Vampiros' success might encourage editors and young authors to explore other dimensions and legacies of Portuguese colonialism. And so I'll finish here. I don't know if I went too, I don't know if my English was too clumsy. I'm sorry, I made myself understand. Yes, I will leave it here, and I'll be very happy that we can now together that we can discuss. I don't know if you have read the Vampiros or any of the other titles. Yes, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Júlia. It was really, really inspiring, and I learned a lot about all those comic books from Portugal. And I have questions, but before I ask my questions, I would like to give the others the opportunity to comment or to ask questions. And I see Leah's hand already, and for all the others, I just repeat briefly, please type in the chat the word question or your name or anything, just to let us know that there is a question, and then we go through the list one by one. So Leah.
Hello, Júlia. Thanks so much for this interesting lecture. It was absolutely interesting for me to know more about these comics. I'm actually, as a comic translator from Portuguese to German, I have dealt with Vampiros already, and I think it's absolutely interesting that this book is included in the Plan Nacional de Educação, in this educational aim. It plays a role, but for me, as somebody who doesn't have so many background about this colonial history of Portugal, I was asking myself if there's enough background shown in this book, because I think it's absolutely, as you showed, an interpretation, and it's an interesting and it's like this horror movie kind of interesting lecture, but I doubt a bit if it educates so much about the historical aspects, or might be that for somebody who's not Portuguese, there will be those lacks of understanding, including me. And when youth in Portugal deal with these issues, they have more background, and they have a major issue they are dealing with in class. But I doubt it, because really after reading this, I was really impressed. But I thought it was mostly a story about this tricky atmosphere and dramatic outcome for this main character. Yeah, and so drama, and not so much a political statement about the colonial war. What do you think about this?
I agree with you, yes. Although you have to take into account that in Portugal, perhaps it is read differently. There is more knowledge. And I think that, I mean, Philippe Mel, from what I read and what I know of him, he's not in this, he does not see himself as an educator, okay? That's definitely not. I mean, he's not going to say, okay, I'm going to teach. No, it's not that way. He was somehow challenged by that. I don't know anything about it, so never heard of, I mean, not never heard, but I don't know much about that war. And I want to know more. I want to know what these men felt and so on. And so the book was used actually in debates, has been used in debates, in meetings with war veterans and broader public in schools and so on. And I think that you can see the book as a trigger for discussions. And I think in that sense, it works well because yes, people read, I mean, yes, what the reactions I have from people and also younger people read it is that, whoo, you just read it so easily because it is this structure that you are so familiar with. And then because you are Portuguese, perhaps, I don't know if with other audiences it works as well. You are curious to know, well, what was it so? Was that so bad in Guinea-Bissau at that time? I mean, were the Portuguese really losing so much ground and being so overwhelmed and so on? I think that in that sense, it fosters a debate on the cultural legacies, but only that. I mean, you cannot read the book and expect that you are reading a history book. That is definitely not a book of history.
Yeah, I think I would be tempted when if I was a publisher and would publish it abroad to give some preface or some additional text, yeah, because we would be lacking this historical knowledge. Okay, thank you.
There is a question by Jean-Miguel Almeidas.
Hello, I'm with or not. Just to add some information about vampiros, and regarding also the question of Leah. The book has an English edition that has an afterword that does a contextualization of the Portuguese War and explains also the song by José Afonso, and this extra, this dossier of about 10 to 12 pages is also in the last Portuguese edition. And I also would like to add regarding the Plano Nacional de Leitura, that the Plano Nacional de Leitura in the last year, 2-3 years, have much more comics being selected. The reason is that before that there was no one at the specialists of the Plano Nacional de Leitura that was specialized in comics. Right now, I am the specialist of the Plano Nacional de Leitura for the comics. So, since 2018, the comics are held with more regularity, like 40 to 50 by semester. That's it.
May I just ask João Miguel Almeidas one question? If I mean, when am I right to say that it is the second comics to be introduced in Plano Nacional de Leitura? Vampiros, that before there was a Pior Banda do Mundo and then Vampiros, that Vampiros is actually the second one, right?
The Portuguese, probably, but at the same time at Vampiros, they are introduced more than 45 books in this semester.
That now, in the last years?
No, in the last years, is more than 100. You could... Comics, yes.
Oh.
Published in, not obviously by Portuguese authors, but published in Portugal and submitted by the publishing houses. Okay. Júlia, do you know a more recent comic that I was expecting that you talked about? It's called Filhos do Rato. You should see it. It's
Yeah.
about also about the war in Guinea-Bissau. It's from two Portuguese authors, Fábio Veras e Luís Zanck.
Okay. Filhos do Rato, right?
Do Rato. It's recent. It has like 2 years.
Okay. No, I ended this research, and I'm sorry for not. I mean, with also Plano Nacional de Leitura. So this is research that I conducted in 2016. So the year when Vampiros was launched. So somehow I ended there, 2016, 2017, and so I know there is a. I was once came across one that had a brief reference to the war. It was a kind of fantastic comic as well, but was less important. But from the last three years, I've been absent, right?
Yeah. Now this one is very recent. It's all about the war.
The Guinea as well.
Yeah, Guinea. It's the more, as you said, it was the one with had most impact on the Portuguese troops, and it was the most violent of the front.
This book has also been translated into English already here, Children of the Rat.
Okay.
And I don't know if in the original edition there's also one page at the end to the historical context, about the historical context. Yeah.
Just like the last edition of the Vampires, yes, like context.
Okay.
I just want to say that João Miguel Lamedas is going to talk in our lecture series as well next week. So you can be curious about his expertise. And I also would like to encourage all of you to ask more questions. Okay, and they are coming right now. That's great. Even the students, please feel free to ask your questions. Don't be shy, don't hesitate. I have a question regarding the question of Lea, or an observation. I had the chance to read both of the books, Cinzas da Revolta and Os Vampiros, thanks to Beatriz. And my impression was that Cinzas da Revolta was very educational. It was very explaining. And that's why I didn't like it, to be honest. That's just my personal reading experience. But I thought Vampiros was much more complex, as you already showed in your presentation. It is the whole complexity of the image of the vampire. And it made me think much more about the colonial context, even though I totally agree with you, Lea, that it's not transmitting information, of course. So yeah, we don't learn anything from the book, maybe. But as Júlia said, it's a trigger for discussion. I would totally agree, because I was starting to think about the whole mental and psychological effects of the war. And yeah, I liked it much more because of this complexity. And maybe just a brief question, or your opinion, Júlia, maybe is it connected to the concept of post-memory as well, this complexity? That maybe if you are close to the experiences, or if you come from a family with these experiences, you wouldn't be able to come up with a story, or with a fictional story of such a complexity as the two authors did by research, actually. I think they researched a lot for the book. What do you think? Is it somehow connected to post-memory, the complexity? Maybe.
I think Marianish, when she started developing the concept of post-memory, she was actually thinking about this connection. I mean, it is mouse. She developed the concept in her analysis of mouse. So this complex, this tense relationship between the son and the Holocaust survivor. So in the US, where you have the loss of territory as well. So it is all these fragments of something terribly that happened in Europe to the parents' generation. So I think actually that the concept and the complexity of the concept comes or was at first problematized by Marianne Isch in the family context, in this context that is completely different from the one of Pérez and Melo. But then she broadened the understanding in her work. She broadened and did not reduce it to this family interaction that we have in Maus. So I think that this complexity could have, I mean, and also in the fact of, in the case of Melo, of course, his parents were not war veterans, were not returnees. But I don't think that that is the explanation why he added so much complexity. I think that I don't see that the impossibility of having a successful and a very complex comics about the colonial war by some children of the colonial war. And you can see it in literature, for example, in The Return. I mean, I'm going back to Ida Flor, she is a child of The Return. And I mean, in my opinion, perhaps it is the more complex book that was written about The Return is hers. And it's not an autobiography for sure, but it is, of course, deeply inspired and deeply influenced by her experiences as a Black child, as a mestizo, as a Black woman, and a child of a white man who came to Portugal with The Return. So I don't know if I answer your questions.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you. Oh, and you're still sharing your screen, by the way, maybe.
Okay. Okay, sorry.
Me as well last time.
Okay.
We have two more questions, Anna and Ceci. Anna.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much for this very interesting contribution. I had one question. You were analyzing a lot of references to comics from the States and tropes also from the United States and the production on Vietnam War. Do you have the feeling that it's the same in literature in Portugal, or is there like a different way, different tropes coming up when in books than in comics? And the second question would be the same for movies. If there is like a more Portuguese way of doing movies, and why do you think that these authors decide to develop a visual language that is so linked to American pop culture?
Well, I think that in the case of Melo, it has to do with his experiences, his socializing experiences, his growing up experiences. So he actually started, I mean, he started his career, so to say, as a hacker, musician. He went to study in the States. I don't know how long he stayed there. So he was a consumer of zombie movies. So Romero was a kind of idol for him. So I think that in Melo, so it comes from Lisbon, a very urban growing up process. So it has to do with his experiences, with his references. His references are American references, so to say. So it is understandable that he uses them. In the case of the movies, the Portuguese movies about the colonial war, I think that most of them, or not most of them, but let's say the commercial ones are influenced by American cinema. So when you see Inferno and so on, you have the influences, and even when the aesthetics are not American aesthetics, I think this understanding of this trauma, the way trauma is articulated, is very similar to what you see on the politics of memory of Vietnam. In literature, I think that in literature, no. I mean, in literature, I would not say. For example, when I was reading Farias' book, A Estranha Guerra do Uso Comum, actually what came to my mind was German literature, the Fata Romana. I think, my God, I don't know if he knows about, I don't know, I've never read anything that connects him. I don't know much about him. So maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but never, in the press, I did not see the word Fata Romana being articulated, but the way the book is constructed reminded me strongly of the German literature instead. And so, and also, even these return academic memórias coloniais and so on, then I think you have more links, or what pops to mind are more are references from other European countries. More then I would put them there. But once again, coming back to Melo and to Pérez, I think it has to do with their growing up and what they read, what they watched when they were growing up. Mm-hmm.
Júlia, muito obrigada pela apresentação. Fiquei super interessada pelo seu trabalho. Now I will pass to the English. My question actually was very in the line of Anna's question, because I'm very interested of the figure of the zombie and the vampire as of the political potential of this figure as an other that it's against the normative, against the system. And actually in the same line of Anna was asking, I wanted to know if in this kind of materials, even this dialogue with the global mass culture, you could search some African roots culture there. I mean, like the jungle as a colonial metaphor, but also connected with a tradition, an oral tradition or a local literature that put the jungle also as a place for danger, but also as a revenge. Just if you can talk a little bit more about that.
I'm sorry, I had some problems with the connection, so I'm not sure if I understood everything. Correct me if I'm wrong. You are asking if there were also some African influences in the way the jungle is being portrayed.
Yes.
Talk about these two. I think that if they are, I mean, yes, we are in this global culture. And I think that I would dare to say that, yes, through American cinema, that not directly, probably, although, of course, this jungle as the metaphor of the jungle, it's also in the Portuguese literature, but I'm not sure that Melo or Pérez, they have read that literature because it's not so familiar or so popular. Okay, perhaps scholars know it, but it's not the kind, or not so many titles are available in bookstores. So I think yes, but indirectly. Okay. It also, I mean, in the story, in the short film, I'll See You in My Dreams, in the zombie movie, I mean, you can also recognize folklore tradition, Portuguese folklore tradition, so about the forest and the spirits of the forest and so on, that you can also recognize. But once again, I mean, these two, I mean, Pérez is from Setúbal, Melo is from Lisbon. I think they were so, although Melo, he comes from, not he, I mean his family, some part of his family come from Beira Interior, and I cannot remember the name, but it's not far away from Coimbra. So he had, in his childhood, he had some contact with the rural areas. So but still his reference were American. So it is growing up in Portugal in the 80s and 90s and so on.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Julia, do you know if they're planning to make a film of vampiros? Because it's really, it would be a great film, wouldn't it?
Yes, I think Philip Mel would love it, but I'm not sure if they have the money. It is a film that would require a lot of money. And you know, I mean, he wanted, I mean, I think he would like to do it, but it would need a lot of funding and so. But it could be a very good reinterpretation of Blair Witch Project.
Any questions?
Queria só dar olá, Júlia. Olá,
Olá.
Júlia. Bom te ver.
Assim agora com estas distâncias, não é?
É tão estranho, mas olha, ainda bem. Ainda bem que nos vemos pelo menos assim.
If there are no further, oh, okay, yeah.
I think you.
It's only Julia. You didn't consider as one example for non-comic literature on colonial war or colonial past Portugal. Dionysius, O Tempo da Geração Espontânea. But you know this work?
No. I mean, there is, if you look at literature, I mean, there is a very significant production.
Okay.
And now, especially in the last years, there has been a boom. There was the boom with the return, the colonial war, the legacies. So it is not like comics where, I mean, where you can make, okay, you can have a list and say, okay, here there are some references, this is about, and so on. With literature, it's really something, I mean, I didn't mention lot of authors from the ones that are writing right now, but also from the 80s, the 90s. The 90s were very, very productive in literature to deal with the past.
Oh yeah, very interesting.
I just tried to point at the tendencies. So the war veterans, the women, the white women's experiences, and now more recently the experience of the generations that came after, the racialized generation. So black, being a black Portuguese, so to say, growing up as a black Portuguese and so on, which is more recently perhaps is the one that's been developing quite well. So,
and in this case, it is a book published in 2014, and it deals with the return and fragments and episodes who have to do with the breaking down in Angola. It's quite brutal and fragmented and very astonishing works. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I make a question? I'm not seeing you, Yannick, sorry. Okay, yeah, I wanted to ask you, Julia, I'm doing a seminar on post-colonial Portugal, and we're doing literature, and I find it a bit difficult to find literature from last years from racialized people in Portugal. We had very interesting, of course, very, very interesting titles, but do you, we will be doing a bit of Escabelo shortly. and we're doing Preto Muito Português from Talma Tivon and from Calafé Palanga. Do you have other titles to recommend?
Well, I would recommend Preto Pôs as Flores. I think it's very interesting. It's unfortunately something like unique.
It's a difficult book, though. I find it very difficult. The language, I find it very, very difficult.
Yes, yes. But I mean, as far as I know, there are not many books that deal with the experience of Black people in rural areas. So, and that makes all the different, I mean, not all the, that's not why the book is interesting, but this is one of the thing that makes it stand apart. But I would like, yes, and Jamila Escabelo, but also other titles. You had also that other, oh, what, I cannot remember her name, Essa Dama Batbue, is also with Angola, is also, but I cannot remember her name right now.
Do you know Preto Muito Português from Talma Tivon?
Yeah.
The students loved it. Was my experience. It's done in like a musical romance too, a bit, many influences from rap and the short chapters. I think people really liked it, and I don't think it's a book that's being studied, is it? Not really.
Not much. There are many of them. They are also very recent. Oh, now I remember. If you want to introduce poetry, then perhaps Raquel Lima.
Thank you.
And rap, and go to rap. I mean, if you want.
Of course, we're doing a lot of music, and the book of Talma Tivon is Preto Muito Português, has many references, and I mean, beginning from Cholage to Guto, and many interesting references that we're doing in class. That book is also it has a very poor edition. I think that's a bit the problem with it too, but it's very enlightening. It's very rich in information too, and it wasn't that hard to read, which was a surprise to me. I thought the students would think, oh, this is lots of reference that I don't know, and some African Portuguese and mixed up and stuff, but I don't think they had that many difficulties in reading it.
Yeah, but I think that now it's a time when there is openness, and I think that many more books will be produced.
Yes.
Produced right now, and editors now, they are open to publish them and say, okay, it's not a risk to publish it, and perhaps it will sell and so on. So
thank you, Júlia. Thank you for reminding me about the Preto Pôs as Flores. I kind of forgot about it, but it's a great book. Thank you.
So yeah, I think there are no more questions, and I once again would like to thank you very much, Júlia, for the presentation and for the systematic presentation of Portuguese comics on the colonial war. It was very interesting, and I think we can all continue with these thoughts. And yes, I would like to invite all of you to join us next week as well, when we leave the colonial context and we're going to concentrate on recent Portuguese comic productions in general with João Miguel Medeiros. And yes, I wish you all a nice evening or afternoon, and send my best wishes to Coimbra.
Okay, thank you very much.